March 1967, Nui Dat Bas, South Vietnam. A 23-year-old lieutenant fresh from Dun Truon Military Academy walks into Major Brian Wade's office with a simple request: command an SAS patrol. Wade looks at the young officer's crisp uniform, his confident posture, his academy honors. Then he says something that would save lives. No, not because you are not smart, not because you lack courage, but because sending you out there right now would kill 4 good men. That rejection defined a philosophy that separated Australian SAS from American infantry in the most brutal classroom in history, the Vietnamese jungle where mistakes were paid in blood. While Australia was rejecting inexperienced lieutenants, the United States was sending 22-year-old officers straight from training schools to command 40 men in combat. No prior experience, no trial period, just a fresh commission and a one-way ticket to the rice paddies. The difference between these two systems would be written in casualty reports, after-action reviews, and the graves of young men who deserved better leadership. This is the story of 2 radically different approaches to military, tested in the same war, under the same conditions, with devastatingly different results. It is a story about what happens when you treat command as something earned versus something granted, about systems that protect lives versus systems that prioritize career development, about the brutal truth that some lessons should never be learned on the job. Lieutenant Bob Kearney was 27 years old when he led his 5-man SAS patrol into the jungle during Operation Hardihood in February 1967. But those 27 years told only part of his story. Behind him were 4 years of deliberate preparation, 18 months in a regular infantry battalion learning basic soldiering, 21 days of SAS selection where 80% failed, 6 months of specialized training in reconnaissance, survival, and unconventional warfare. Another 6 months as a probationary patrol officer, under the watch of veteran sergeants who had authority to send him back if he proved incompetent. Only then, after proving himself at every stage, was Bob Kearney trusted to lead 4 men into territory where the nearest help was hours away. On that February morning, Kearney's patrol moved through thick jungle west of Nui Dat. Their mission was reconnaissance, locating Viet Cong supply routes without engaging. Standard long-range patrol work for the SAS. 4 hours into the movement, Kearney noticed something. The birds had gone silent. Fresh footprints crossed their intended path. Broken branches at shoulder height suggesting recent passage. His training identified the pattern immediately. Ambush ahead. A less experienced officer might have dismissed it as paranoia, might have stuck to the planned route because deviating required justification, might have convinced himself the signs meant nothing. Kearney did what years of preparation had taught him. He stopped, assessed, made the hard call. He hand-signaled his team, aborting the planned route and moving to elevated defensive terrain. Within 20 minutes, they observed 60-plus Viet Cong moving through the exact area where they would have been. The VC were setting up an ambush position, waiting for exactly what Kearney had refused to give them: targets. Kearney coordinated a silent extraction using prearranged radio codes. His patrol melted back into the jungle, reported enemy positions, and lived to fight another day. 0 casualties. Mission aborted safely. The after-action report included a stark assessment from his commanding officer. A novice lieutenant would have walked his entire patrol directly into that kill zone. 4 years of preparation had just saved 5 lives in 4 seconds of decision-making. Now shift the scene 3,000 miles east and 8 months forward. November 1967, Hill 875, near Dak To. Second Lieutenant Matthew Harrison of the 173rd Airborne Brigade was 23 years old. He had been in Vietnam for 6 weeks. This was his first major combat operation as platoon commander. Harrison had graduated officer candidate school 4 months earlier after 23 weeks of training. He spent 9 weeks at infantry school at Fort Benning. Then he flew to Vietnam, received 2 weeks of in-country orientation, and took command of 40 men whose lives now depended on his judgment. Harrison's platoon was part of a larger operation to take Hill 875 from entrenched North Vietnamese Army positions. As they moved up the hill through dense jungle, his platoon sergeant, a 2-tour veteran with 3 years of combat experience, pulled Harrison aside. The sergeant pointed out the obvious signs. The trail they were following was too clear, too convenient. The vegetation had been deliberately cut to channel movement. The flanks were blind, no security elements deployed. Moving in their current tight formation made them vulnerable to ambush. The sergeant recommended halting, sending out scouts, establishing flank security before proceeding. Harrison listened, Then he made his decision. He was the officer. He had the map. He had the orders from battalion. They were behind schedule. The sergeant was being overcautious. Harrison ordered the platoon to continue in column formation down the trail. 60 meters later, the jungle exploded. North Vietnamese forces had set up a textbook L-shaped ambush. Machine gun fire raked the compressed column of American soldiers. RPGs slammed into the formation. In the first 10 minutes, 18 men died, including Matthew Harrison. 22 more were wounded. The survivors spent 3 hours fighting their way to a defensive position while calling for reinforcement and medevac. The classified after-action report, not declassified until 1982, was brutally direct. Platoon commander demonstrated inadequate tactical judgment consistent with lack of experience. Casualties could have been avoided with experienced leadership. Sergeant's recommendations were sound and ignored. The report noted that Harrison's decision-making reflected training school theory, but zero understanding of jungle warfare reality. He had learned tactics from manuals and training exercises. He died before he could learn them from experience. So did 17 of his men. These two incidents, separated by months and miles but occurring in the same war, illustrated a fundamental divide in military philosophy. The Australian system had spent 4 years ensuring Bob Kearney would make the right call when it mattered. The American system had spent 6 months preparing Matthew Harrison and hoped he would figure it out before someone died. One system worked, the other filled body bags. The Australian approach was built on a simple premise: command is earned, not granted. When the Special Air Service Regiment formed its Vietnam deployment, leadership positions came with non-negotiable requirements. Officers had to complete SAS selection as if they were enlisted soldiers. The 3-week selection course had an 80% failure rate. Physical fitness, navigation, stress management, and tactical judgment were tested to breaking point. Officers received no special treatment. Many failed. Those who passed then entered a 6 to 12-month probationary, where they served under veteran patrol commanders, learning the specific demands of long-range reconnaissance in hostile territory. But the filtering did not stop there. SAS sergeants, the backbone of patrol operations, had authority that was revolutionary for a military hierarchy. They could veto commanders they deemed incompetent. If a sergeant believed an officer lacked the tactical judgment to keep a patrol alive, that officer was RTU, returned to unit. Between 1966 and 1968, 4 lieutenants were RTU'd from SAS for incompetence, not because they were cowards, not because they lacked intent, but because veteran sergeants assessed them as tactically unsafe. In the SAS, you did not command because you had rank insignia. You commanded because the men trusted you would not kill them through ignorance. Sergeant Ken Mansfield of 3rd Squadron SAS put it bluntly in a 1969 interview. In the SAS, you do not command because you have a star on your shoulder. You command because the men trust you will not get them killed by ignorance. That trust was not given freely. It was earned through demonstrated competence over years, not months. The Australian philosophy reflected hard lessons from history. Gallipoli in 1915 had burned into Australian military culture the cost of incompetent officers. Thousands of Australian soldiers died in futile assaults ordered by British commanders who treated men as expendable resources. Australia's military never forgot. Their system was designed to ensure that mistake would not repeat. General Sir Thomas Daly, commanding Australian forces in Vietnam, made the priority clear in 1960. We prefer 100 excellent patrols to 500 mediocre patrols. Leadership quality is non-negotiable. Australia had a smaller army. They could not afford to waste lives on learning curve. Every patrol had to count. Every commander had to be ready. If that meant rejecting eager young lieutenants until they proved them, so be it. Patience saved lives. The rejected lieutenant from Nui Dat embodied this philosophy. After Major Wade denied his request for SAS command in March 1967, the young officer could have been bitter. He could have pulled rank, complained to higher command, argued his academy credentials proved his worth. He did not. He accepted the decision, understanding the wisdom behind it. He deployed to 6th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment for 12 months, gaining practical infantry experience in the field. He learned how to read terrain, how to move silently, how to anticipate enemy tactics, how to keep soldiers alive in an environment that punished mistakes instantly. After 12 months, he applied again to SAS. This time, he passed selection on merit. By 1969, he was a competent patrol commander, leading men who trusted his judgment because he had earned that trust through demonstrated ability, not just through rank. Meanwhile, across the American military apparatus, a completely different system was grinding through thousands of young officers. The Defense Officer Personnel Management Act, combined with Vietnam-era policies, created what would later be called the officer crisis. The pipeline was brutally efficient at producing quantity, but deeply flawed at ensuring quality. A college graduate entered ROTC or officer candidates. 12 to 23 weeks of training transformed civilian into officer. 9 weeks of infantry school at Fort Benning taught basic tactics. Then, with zero combat experience, an average age of 22, and no practical understanding of jungle warfare, these brand-new second lieutenants flew to Vietnam to take command of platoons of 40 men. The justification was systemic. The United States military needed thousands of officers. Vietnam was viewed not just as a war to win, but as a professional development opportunity. Every officer needed command time on their record for promotion. The Army had more lieutenant slots than experienced officers to fill them. The solution was to push new officers into command immediately and rotate them every 6 months to give more officers their turn. Career development trumped tactical effectiveness. The institution prioritized distributing experience across thousands of officers over concentrating expertise where it was needed most, leading men in combat. The 6-month rotation policy made the problem worse. Just as a lieutenant began understanding jungle warfare, began earning his soldiers' trust, began making better tactical decisions, he was rotated out, transferred to a staff position, or sent home. His platoon received another rookie. The cycle repeated. Some platoons went through 3 or 4 different commanders in a single year. Each time, soldiers had to adapt to a new leadership style, a new decision-making pattern, a new level of competence or incompetence. Trust never had time to develop. Expertise never accumulated where it mattered most. The statistics told a grim story. Between 1967 and 1970, 43% of all second lieutenant casualties in Vietnam occurred in their first 90 days in country. Those 3 months were a brutal filter where inexperience met reality. Platoons under commanders with 0 to 3 months experience suffered casualty rates 2.7 times higher than platoons under more experienced officers. 34% of American platoons lost 2 or more commanders in a single year. Every new commander represented a reset, a learning curve paid in blood. The human cost was staggering, but the institutional response was slow. A 1970 internal Army report titled "The Officer Crisis" revealed the damage. 64% of veteran sergeants reported lack of confidence in junior officers. These were the men who actually knew how to fight, who had survived multiple tours, who understood the terrain and the enemy. They did not trust the 22-year-olds making life and death decisions. 38% of lieutenants themselves admitted feeling unprepared for command. They knew they were learning on the job. They knew soldiers were dying because of their inexperience, but the system offered no alternative. The ultimate breakdown of trust appeared in fragging incidents. Between 1969 and 1971, 230-plus documented cases occurred where American soldiers attacked their own officers. 34 confirmed deaths of officers from intentional friendly fire. The primary cause cited in investigations was incompetent commanders putting troops in unnecessary risk. Soldiers were killing their own leaders rather than follow them into another preventable disaster. The system had created such a crisis of confidence that men chose murder over obedience. That was not a failure of individual character. That was systemic collapse. One incident from Operation Cedar Falls in January 1967 illustrated the daily reality. A second lieutenant on his 3rd day of platoon command ordered his men to cross an open field without reconnaissance or cover. His platoon sergeant, a veteran of 2 tours, questioned the order. The area was known for mines and offered 0 concealment. Moving across it violated basic tactical doctrine. The lieutenant insisted he was the officer. The sergeant was to execute orders, not question. The platoon moved out. 7 men died when they hit a minefield. 12 more were wounded. The lieutenant was laterally transferred, not removed from command entirely, just moved to a different unit where he could continue learning on someone else's lives. Contrast that with another documented case from the Australian side. During a patrol in 1968, an SAS lieutenant made a judgment call to engage a small Viet Cong unit instead of maintaining silent reconnaissance. The engagement was successful militarily but violated mission parameters. Upon return, his squadron commander and the patrol sergeant reviewed the decision. They determined the lieutenant had prioritized personal glory over mission discipline. He was immediately RTU'd back to his regular infantry unit. No second chances, no lateral transfer. The message was clear. In the SAS, tactical judgment and mission discipline were everything. One mistake could cost you your command because the stakes were too high for learning curve. The American military was not blind to these problems. By 1970, reform attempts began. The Army tried extending command periods from 6 months to 9 months, hoping the extra time would allow officers to gain real proficiency. The reform largely failed. 9 months was still insufficient to develop true expertise. Many officers resisted extensions because it delayed their rotation to staff positions and slowed their promotion timeline. Career incentives still pointed away from becoming genuinely good at combat leadership. In 1971, a pilot program called Experienced Leader Training launched. New lieutenants would spend 30 additional days training with combat veterans before taking command, learning from those who survived, understanding mistakes that killed others, building practical knowledge before lives depended on it. The program showed promise, but was cancelled in 1972 when ground troop deployments ended. The institutional will to fix the system appeared only when the war was ending. Colonel David Hackworth testified before Congress in 1971, speaking truth that most generals avoided. We are sending 22-year-old boys who have never seen combat to command 40 men in hostile territory. They learn on the job, and many die learning. Hackworth was a highly decorated veteran, multiple tours, a soldier who had earned credibility the hard way. His testimony put official voice to what everyone in the field already knew. The emperor had no clothes. The system was broken. Young officers were being sacrificed to a personnel management philosophy that treated war as a career development opportunity. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Yingling, writing a retrospective analysis in 2007, was even more blunt. We used Vietnam as a leadership development laboratory. The problem? Failed experiments resulted in dead soldiers. That sentence captured the core insanity. The United States military had treated combat operations as a training ground for thousands of officers who needed command time for their records. The cost of that training was measured in casualty reports and body bags. Every inexperienced lieutenant who made a fatal mistake represented not individual but systemic failure. The institution put him there unprepared and called it leadership development. The Australian system represented the opposite philosophy. Major Brian Wade's decision to reject that eager lieutenant in March 1967 was not personal. It was professional responsibility. Wade knew that patrol command meant operating days away from support, in small teams where one bad decision killed everyone. He knew the enemy was skilled, patient, and unforgiving. He knew the jungle amplified mistakes and punished incompetence without mercy. Sending an untested lieutenant into that environment was not giving someone an opportunity. It was gambling with 5 lives. Wade refused to roll those dice. When Wade told that lieutenant he needed more experience, he was protecting not just the 4 men who would have been on that patrol, but the lieutenant himself. Inexperienced officers died at horrific rates. Giving someone command before they were ready was often a death sentence. The Australian system's seemingly harsh rejection was actually an act of mercy. Prove yourself first, learn the skills, earn the trust, then we will give you the responsibility. That patience saved lives on both sides of the command relationship. The contrast between systems created a measurable difference in outcomes. Official casualty data from 1966 to 1971 showed Australian SAS had 12 officers killed in action per 1,000. Regular Australian infantry had 18 per 1,000. American infantry lieutenants had 52 per 1,000. The numbers reflected not just different levels of danger, but different levels of preparation. Australian officers were better trained, more experienced, and more likely to make decisions that kept themselves and their men alive. 0% of Australian SAS officers became casualties in their first 90 days. 0, because by the time an officer earned SAS command, he was no longer learning basics. Compare that to the 43% of American second lieutenants who died in their first 90 days. The first 3 months were a crucible of inexperience meeting reality. Those who survived learned. Those who did not became statistic. The tragedy was not that individual American lieutenants lacked courage or intelligence. Most were brave, dedicated, and trying their best. The tragedy was that the system set them up to fail. It put them in positions requiring years of expertise with only months of training. It rotated them out just as they gained competence. It incentivized risk-taking for career advancement rather than sound tactical judgment. It ignored the warnings of veteran sergeants who knew better. The institution failed its officers as badly as those unprepared officers then failed their men. The philosophical difference came down to a fundamental question. What is the purpose of military command? The Australian answer was clear. Command exists to accomplish missions while protecting the lives of soldiers. Therefore, only those proven capable of doing both should command. Career development, ego, fairness to eager young officers, none of that mattered more than the primary mission: bring your people home alive. The SAS was willing to hurt feelings, delay careers, and reject capable people who were not yet ready, all in service of that priority. The American answer, revealed through policy rather than rhetoric, was more complex. Command existed partly to win battles but also to develop a large officer corps for a global military. Individual career progression mattered. Distributing opportunity mattered. Creating thousands of officers with command experience mattered for institutional health. Tactical effectiveness at the platoon level was important, but not important enough to override the personnel management. The needs of the institution trumped the needs of the 30 or 40 men in any given platoon. That calculus, rational from a bureaucratic perspective, was lethal from a foxhole perspective. One story captured the human reality behind the statistics. After the Hill 875 disaster, the platoon sergeant who had warned Lieutenant Harrison and been overruled survived the ambush. He spent the next 3 hours keeping survivors alive, organizing defense, coordinating medevac. He did his job with the professionalism expected of a veteran sergeant, but in his after-action interview, he broke down. He had known the ambush was there. He had told the lieutenant. He had been ignored. Now 18 men were dead, including the kid who had been too confident to listen. The sergeant carried that weight for the rest of his life. He had seen the mistake coming and been powerless to stop it because an inexperienced officer outranked experienced judgment. How many times did that scene repeat across Vietnam? How many veteran sergeants watched in horror as green lieutenants made obvious mistakes? How many tried to speak up and were told to follow orders? How many survivors carried guilt for deaths they had predicted but could not prevent? The American system did not just kill young officers. It traumatized the experienced soldiers forced to watch it happen. Meanwhile, in the Australian SAS, sergeants had real power. When Sergeant Ken Mansfield said a lieutenant was not ready, that lieutenant did not get command. Period. The formal rank hierarchy still existed, but tactical competence trumped rank insignia. That inversion of normal military protocol protected everyone. Officers benefited from honest assessment rather than false confidence. Soldiers benefited from leaders who had earned their position. Missions benefited from sound decision-making. The only thing that suffered was ego, and in the SAS, ego was considered a liability anyway. The long-term consequences of these different approaches extended beyond Vietnam. The United States military spent decades after the war rebuilding professional military education, extending training timelines, and creating mentorship programs specifically designed to address the leadership failures of Vietnam. The disaster had forced institutional learning. Modern American officers receive far more extensive preparation before taking command. The lessons were learned, but they were learned the hard way, paid for with the lives of soldiers who deserved better the first time. Australia's system required less reform because it had been built correctly from the start. The emphasis on proven competence, extended preparation, and sergeant empowerment continued. The SAS remained one of the most elite and effective special operations forces in the world, built on the same philosophical foundation laid down in Vietnam. Earn your command through demonstrated ability, not through rank alone. The title of this story asks a simple question. Why did Aussie SAS reject new lieutenants while US platoons were led by rookies? The answer is equally simple but profound. Australia treated command as a sacred trust that required proof of competence was granted. America treated command as a developmental opportunity that came with rank. One system prioritized the lives of soldiers above all else. The other prioritized the career development needs of an institutional officer. When those philosophies met the unforgiving reality of jungle warfare, one produced veterans like Bob Kearney, who made life-saving decisions based on years of preparation. The other produced tragedies like Hill 875, where inexperience cost 18 lives in 10 minutes. The Vietnamese jungle did not care about good intention. It did not grade on a curve. It did not offer do-overs. It demanded competence and killed incompetence without mercy. Every patrol, every movement, every decision was a test where failure meant death. In that environment, the Australian philosophy of prove yourself first was not cautious or overcautious. It was realistic. The American philosophy of learn on the job was not efficient development. It was criminal negligence dressed up as opportunity. The rejected lieutenant from Nui Dat, the one Major Wade turned away in March 1967, eventually became a successful SAS patrol commander. But he only got that chance because the system forced him to earn it. He spent a year in regular infantry getting the experience he lacked. He passed selection by meeting the same standards as everyone else. He proved he could be trusted with lives before lives were put in his hands. When he finally led his first patrol, he was ready. His men came home. That outcome was not luck. That was system design working exactly as intended. Lieutenant Matthew Harrison never got that chance. He was put in command before he was ready. His men paid the price. He paid the price. The system that failed him moved on to the next batch of inexperienced lieutenants and repeated the cycle. Harrison was not a bad officer. He was an unprepared officer put in an impossible position by a system that valued throughput over readiness. His death and the deaths of his men were preventable. All it would have required was the same patience, the same standards, the same respect for the difficulty of command that the Australian system embodied. 60 years later, the lessons remain relevant. Leadership in life and death situations cannot be treated as on-the-job training. Some positions require proven competence before they are granted. Some mistakes are too costly to be learning opportunities. Some responsibilities are too grave to be distributed based on career development. The Australian SS understood this in 1967. The American military learned it the hard way, written in the blood of soldiers who deserved leaders who were ready to lead. Major Brian Wade's decision to reject that lieutenant was an act of courage. It would have been easier to say yes, to give the eager young officer his chance, to hope for the best. Wade chose the harder path. He said no, knowing it would disappoint, knowing it required justification, knowing it meant more work to find qualified commanders. He said no because he valued the lives of his soldiers more than the feelings of one officer. That is leadership. That is responsibility. That is what it means to treat command as something sacred rather than something else. If you found this deep dive into military history valuable, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button if you appreciate content that goes beyond surface-level history. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. Do modern militaries still struggle with this balance between career development and tactical readiness? Your engagement helps us continue bringing you detailed historical analysis. Thanks for watching.